felt this real numbness when she passed away. Like I couldn't cry anymore. I cried every night going to bed. I just couldn't see the future. And coming back, that whole grieving process started. And at this point, I was 21, 22. And for those 10 years, up until I was 31, 32, I would be in this state of grieving, but also like depression. The gain, I talk about the grief as a gift. When we go through something so young, and so we go through something that's unexpected, we really need to lean into what that's telling us. Like, what's the sign, I say, from the universe?
Yeah.
What's that telling us? How are we making this happen for us, not to us?
Do you get really annoyed when you see on social media people playing the victim and they're doing it just for likes and engagement and to go viral? Something that actually really irritates me. And something that also annoys me is because we're in this field on the cosmic bridge where we're talking about things around mental health, psychology, spirituality, sometimes nowadays that is associated with this culture in mental health of playing the victim and all these bad things have happened to me and that's why I'm not doing well in my job or whatever it is, right? So the reason I really like today's show is we're going to be talking about how one of the worst things that happens to people, which is the death of a loved one, can actually be an experience that is going to help you in your life because it's going to help build resilience. So let's get on to the guest. It is Charlotte Lloyd. Now, Charlotte Lloyd runs a company very similar to mine, where she has her own sales consulting company and she trains and coaches salespeople. And like me, she's realized that mindset psychology is such an important part of sales. We're not going to be talking sales tactics, though. We're going to be talking about, sadly, when she was 17, her mother died and how that really transformed her life, originally in obviously a terrible way, but eventually in a good way. And she realized that this was something that was an event that happened for her, that was destined for her, and eventually changed her life in a positive way. So let's get into it and let's learn from Charlotte's wisdom. All right, Charlotte, welcome. You're coming into us from Madrid, I believe, today.
Yes, I am. How are you doing?
Yeah, all good. And you're originally from the north of England, I believe?
From the north of England. Yeah, I'm from Liverpool. Liverpool.
Liverpool. And we got a Scouser in the house today.
A
Yeah.
scouse in the house, yeah.
um, well, moving on to not as light topics as Scouse humor. I know one of the things I'm thankful that you're open to discussing today was, and to kick off with the heavy stuff. You had a period of 3 years in your life you were telling me about before the show. So I was wondering if we could talk through that to kick it off.
So 3 years. So back when I was in school, I was in the middle of my A levels, which are, if for people that don't know what A levels are, I'm not sure what the US equivalent is actually, but they're really
I don't
important
know either. Yeah.
that you
If you know,
do.
mention it in the comments. Yeah. Yeah.
You do them between 16 to 18, and it gets you into college, university. And I was an only child, so like you, Mikey. Oh no, you do have a brother, I think.
I've got a couple of brothers. Yeah. Oh,
A couple of brothers, but you have older parents. That's it.
yeah.
And I had older parents. I was an only child, and all of a sudden, I started in a new school. So for my A levels, I went to this new school. I'd been 5 years in a previous school. And 5 months into my new school, suddenly my mother took ill. And it was unexpected. Her and my father weren't really getting on. The communication in their relationship had broken down. And we were supposed to be going away so it was February, like midterm, half-term break. But my mother suddenly lost her speech and couldn't. One day, I was actually coming home from it was a Sunday job that I had. It was the 12th of February. It was a Sunday. And I rang the bell. Something made me, I just passed my driving test, right? So this was, I'm not even going to say the year. It's the late 1990s. And I instantly realized when my mother opened the door that something was very seriously wrong. She was looking at me like she didn't know what was going on. She couldn't say a word. Everything she tried to say, she would go, she coughed, no words would come out. And her and my father had been ignoring each other for weeks. So as soon as I came home, my father could see that she couldn't speak. He knew something. I think he already knew something was serious, but he was then like, I said, how long's she been like this? And he said, oh, for like maybe an hour or so. And I was like, Dad, we have to get to the hospital straight away. Fast forward, we go to the hospital. They say she's had a stroke, brain stroke, and it was just this, wow, where's this come from? A month later, that turns out to be a brain tumor. So the hospital actually missed the tumor on the first diagnosis, which can happen. This happens in something like 2% of brain tumors are hidden by a blood clot, because the tumor creates this blood clot and somehow it masks the actual tumor. And it was just, everything changed in that moment. I was very close to my mother. She was 50. I have a feeling, though, that this developed before she was 50, because she used to get migraines and headaches for a very long time. And we'd always be taught, like, oh, I've got migraine, but I'm fine. Won't take any pills, medication, just kept ignoring them. And it became, so 5 months after that time, she passed away. So this was the February, the March, they found the tumor. They actually told my dad at the time that it wasn't curable. They didn't tell my mom, because back then, years ago, they didn't do that. If the person didn't want to know what they had, they didn't really tell them. So my dad didn't tell me. I think they thought, well, let's protect her. Let's, keep it. Well, my mother didn't know, although she did know towards the end, because how can you not know? But her health started, she got better. And then her health started to deteriorate again. So she went through chemo, she had radiotherapy. That did get her some quality of life back, but she wasn't able, her left side didn't work. There were lasting effects. Her speech came back, but then it wasn't the same as it was before. Suddenly everything changed very quickly. And the shock just, in that whole time that she was ill, I felt like I was just trying to live, trying to exist, go to school. Going to school was actually a relief in a way, because it got me away from the situation. Walking home from school every day which is what I did. I would feel this fear in my stomach, that in your gut, you feel that fear of, how is my mom going to be today? Is she going to be well? Is she going to be not very well? Because every day was different. It was like living with a time bomb. There was no Google then. There were just bricks as mobile phones. So you couldn't look anything up. You couldn't look up this name of this brain tumor, which I found on Google or even in the dictionary. And I think at the time, that for me, that was a blessing, because if I'd have known that she wasn't going to make it in that time, I think my life just would have turned completely upside down. It was already turned upside down. So I don't know, looking back, how I coped at that time, I don't know, but I felt like a robot. Like I was just doing things, but not really thinking about what I was doing, going through motions, feeling this fear and anxiety like never before. And of course, nobody at the time was going through that experience. Nobody at my school. I think somebody had lost their father when they were younger. But there was no one I could relate to. There was no Facebook, there was no internet to help me connect to other people around the world. So we were in this bubble. And it was such a shock, because back then, people 50 and under weren't getting cancer. Now they are a lot more for different reasons, because of processed foods, because there's we're seeing a lot more cases now, sadly, but there wasn't a support network in place. And she passed away in the so in the summer holidays, so I was going from my first year of exams, A levels, into my second year. And I felt this real numbness when she passed away. Like I couldn't cry anymore. I cried every night going to bed. I just couldn't see the future. And I then went into this, well, I've got to do my A levels. I've got to get to university. That's what she would have wanted. I have to study. So I didn't really grieve properly. And then I went to university, and then I did my gap year in Brazil, and coming back, that whole grieving process started. And at this point, I was 21, 22. And for those 10 years up until I was 31, 32, I would be in this state of, you know, grieving, but also like depression. And all I could focus on was the lack,
Yeah.
right? All I could focus on was the lack. And I realized, well, actually, I've gained something here. And it took me until 5 years ago to actually really lean into that, because her death, it gave me a lot of positives, got me into sales. There's a lot of rejection in sales. It can be awful, but it didn't feel awful to me. It felt like, wow, this is exciting and exhilarating. And getting told no, yes, it can be stinging, but it's not stinging as something like death.
Yeah.
So it taught me a very important lesson. And as well, there's the gain. I talk about the grief as a gift. When we go through something so young, and so we go through something that's unexpected, we really need to lean into what that's telling us. Like, what's the sign, I say, from the universe?
Yeah.
What's that telling us? How are we making this happen for us, not to us?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
mindset, when you shift into that mindset, and it took me longer than perhaps it might take other people, I don't know, but then you're capable of doing almost anything. And the same when I started my business. If you'd have asked me 18 months ago, because I remember you approached me, Mike, and I was sort of just starting out and you were further
Yeah.
ahead in terms of you started your business. Even when we had our first conversation, I thought, I was still in corporate, and I thought, nah, there's no way I can launch my own thing. I still didn't have that. How can I do this? But as time evolved, that mindset, that shift enabled me to say, okay, how can I reframe this? How can I make this work? And looking at things from that perspective. And it's very hard to do. If I look back, I say, I wish I could have done it sooner. But I
Yeah.
think even now it came at the right time.
So let's taking a step back. So it was you were 18 when your mum passed, is that right?
17.
17. So you were doing your A levels. This is back in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you said it's so obviously it sounds like at the start you kind of weren't, you just got on with your life, you did your A levels, you went to university, and then it was
Yeah.
only what 3-4 years later there was a term you said, I think, delayed bereavement. So it was like you grieved at a later stage.
Yeah. Grieved at a later stage because something just kept telling me. My mom was very determined that I'd succeed. She wanted me to do law at university. She was very much projected a lot of what she didn't achieve onto me in a good way. And I said to myself, I have to get to university. I can't take a year off. I need to get through my exams and then complete my university. And I also wanted to get away from my house, because the house without my mother didn't feel the same. It felt just wrong. And this is my father and I built a very strong relationship because he was kind of missing from that, because me and my mum would just do everything together. We were just inseparable. So we did build a good relationship, but it took 5 years or more to get there, because then I went away. So as soon as I got my place at university, I went to university, and it was a year later, and it just felt right. It just felt like, I'm so glad I'm escaping Liverpool, because it's reminding me of everything that I don't have, which is sad, because now I go back and I think it really is a great place, and there's some great people, and families are close together. But because that was my pain at the time of not having what most other people had, it made me want to run away. And the running away, in a way, I mean, a gap year is great, and I recommend people do it. But then I went away again. I moved house many times, went back to Brazil. Then I got into a role where I traveled extensively with work. So I was always felt like I was running away from myself. And I did that for 20 years. And then eventually, it got to that point where I thought, well, I'm getting to see, and I saw some wonderful countries and had some wonderful experiences. But ultimately, what I didn't realize at the time was that part of it was me running away from me. And you can go to the most exotic place on earth, but if you haven't dealt with what's going
Yeah.
on in your head, it's not, no change of scenery is going to solve that.
Yeah. The delayed bereavement thing you said is interesting because a couple of friends of mine, one was he was 13 and his mum died. And I remember it kind of hit him when we were like 18, when he'd almost was old enough to process it, and then had a very, dark period in his life. And another friend of mine had also a mum died just before we went to university, very close friend of mine. And then in the third year of university, suddenly from one day to the next, he just kind of disappeared and like he went home and we didn't know for a couple of weeks. And we're like, where's he gone? And then eventually we realized, yeah, he was like, told us later he was dealing with this. So it seems like it's quite a common experience that people have. And I don't know if you've done like research into this or talked to other people who've been through the same thing as you in terms of like having that delayed experience.
Do you know what, Mikey? I haven't. I'm glad that you brought this up though, because it helps me to know other people have been through it. But I never spoke to anyone that went through a delayed bereavement reaction. But, whenever I hear that somebody's lost their mother and there's children involved, even when we look at Prince William and Prince Harry, whether you agree
Yeah.
with it or not, they're people, they're humans. Doesn't matter, they're living in a gilded cage, but they have everything. But not having your mother, there's no amount of money or wealth that's going to make you feel
Yeah.
better. And when seeing them walk behind the mother's coffin 2 years after my mum died, that was just, oh my goodness, those poor boys. That's all I could think about. Like, how awful. And even in some ways worse, because they weren't allowed to express their emotions at the
Yeah.
time. They had to just get on with it. And they do a lot for mental health as well, which I think is great, because mental health, especially in when it happens to children, it's something that has been neglected. We're seeing a lot of people doctors are giving antidepressants left, right, and center. And it's like, do
Mm.
we need to give them to people? What they need is
Yeah.
therapy, maybe cognitive behavior therapy. That's what works. But again, you've got to be ready for it. You've got to be able to go to therapy and show up and know that
Mm.
you've got to be open with your emotions. Maybe it doesn't work for some people, but we need to make this more common. And I think we're getting there, where people will talk about it, but I still feel there's an avoidance. And social media in this way has brought people together, because we can join groups around the world, see people who have lost a loved one or people who are going through cancer or anything like that. There's a way that you can connect to other people that are going through that same experience. And for me, that's really important, because when I went through it, and obviously your friends went through it, it sounded like there wasn't really that support in place.
Yeah. And like, when you're 13 for one friend or 18 for the other friend, and even in your case, most of your friends at that point haven't lost loved ones. It will probably come later in life. So I
Yeah,
think there
and
can be that
exactly.
isolation.
You are in isolation. It's not a relatable experience. People are very uncomfortable about talking about death. And I think this
Mm.
is something that we need to talk about more, because we are all going to die, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
We don't know when that's going to happen, but we need to be open about sharing our thoughts and feelings around it. And we also need to be grateful for what we have, and practicing gratitude, journaling is something that's really helped me a lot more in the last 2 or 3 years. I used to laugh at this, I used to laugh and think, oh, why do you want to journal and be grateful for stuff? But, that's one recipe for not dealing with your emotions, because you're not aware
Yeah.
of what you've got around you. 9 times out of 10, you're in a better position than 70% or more of the population. So lean into that, but know when to ask for help as well. And especially
Mm.
men, like when my dad was going through this, I saw him cry once and it really shocked me, but it also made me think he actually has emotions. He can express his
Yeah.
emotions. And my dad was born in 1932. So, people
Wow.
were that stoic, stiff upper lip, no showing emotions, but he went through a really hard time. And
Mm.
going back, if I could change that and talk to him more about how he felt at the time. Like, how did you
Yeah.
feel at that moment? It must have been really hard. It must have been, it was soul destroying. I mean, he said to me, he actually said to me when he picked me up in the car I had a job at John Lewis, believe it or not, on a Saturday. And I remember him picking me up in the car and he said, your mum's got cancer. And he just did not say anything. He was quite serious, my dad, but he was just the way that he said it this time. And it was very, very grave. And I thought, oh, and then I get to the hospital, it drives me to the hospital. We go into the hospital, we see my mom, and suddenly seems a lot better than what she was when she'd had her first
Yeah.
operation to remove the blood clot. They took part of the tumor away. They did a biopsy and they said it was cancer. But my dad, when he told me that news, I now know, because he told me once she passed away, he said, look, on that day, the
Yeah.
neurologist told me that she wasn't going to make it. So, but it felt like that as well in his voice, because when I saw my mum in the hospital, she seemed quite back to her old
Yeah.
self. She seemed a lot better. So, yeah, but he was dealing with that. He almost said, like, I want to throw myself off a bridge, not in those kind of words, but words to that effect. He was really couldn't believe what was happening. And
Yeah.
the way that men dealt with their emotions, and some still do, is, he would go to the pub, he'd see his friends there, have a drink, probably wouldn't talk about it much, but
Yeah.
that was the way of dealing with it, was not dealing with it, burying it under the carpet.
Yeah. So with your, delayed bereavement, as you said, you haven't spoken to other people who've been through this process, but just from my small sample size of you and my two friends, it seems like this is a thing that happens. Do you think that's happening? Well, let's just talk about your case, because as you said, you're about to go into university, you're at the end of school. So it's
Yeah.
like an important time of your life when you're turning 18, right? You're almost doing all this studying that's going to define, or at least they tell you in university and school, that's going to define the rest of your life, right? So do you think it's that almost in the moment, even if someone dies, you've still got to get on with life, right? And sometimes by getting on with life, you just, forget that actually you are going through this terrible thing and it's, buried somewhere deep in your unconscious.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that. It's like you do bury it deep in your unconscious, and you don't want to be seen to be a burden to anyone. I think that's how I felt at the time, and how much would attention and help would you get, because you just want to be normal.
Mm,
You want people to acknowledge, but at the same time you don't want people to be thinking, oh, what should I say, what should I do?
yeah.
And I had help. My aunt became like one of my aunts became like a mother to me after that. And
Mm,
I would call her, I'd be panicking, or I'd go to her house with my uncle, my cousin. So I did have that support. But yeah, looking back, I felt like I was the only person going through it. And the problem, and again, not having access to internet and access to other people around the
mm,
world it just made it feel more raw and more like I'm the only person going through this. It was very difficult for me to see what the lesson was at the time.
yeah. So yeah, you go through that period, you just kind of get on with life. As you say, you're traveling through Brazil and everything hits you, and then you come back, and then you said, there's like 10 years of depression. I think when you lose a parent, right, it's obviously a tough thing that you're never just going to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to be all right, and eventually get to your conclusion of, death happens and it makes you more resilient and stuff. But there's obviously a time process that comes with it. In your case, you said
Yeah.
it took you 10 years, but I think regardless, it's going to be a certain amount of years. But what do you wish maybe someone had told you when you just got back from Brazil and you realized how I'm grieving? What do you think is like a message, I guess, you could now say to yourself back then?
I'd probably say to myself, it's going to be all right. But I actually felt like I was losing my mind at that time. And that's what I couldn't see that at the time. I thought, oh my goodness, this is like, I feel like I've been hit by a ton of bricks. I feel like people following me in the street, which was like hallucinations.
Wow.
That was like the doctor said to me, that's pretty serious stuff. I don't know. Looking back, I think I did everything that I could do at the time. There's nothing that I would say therapy, counseling probably could be a good thing to do, even if you don't feel like you need it in the beginning, because you need to know, okay, I'm not actually grieving at the moment. Why am I not grieving? Talking through that process is going to help you a lot more, rather than just, yeah, you've got to let it happen. When my mom passed away and we were at the funeral, I couldn't cry. But I cried for 6 months on end, non-stop. So on the day of the funeral, it just felt like I was not even in my body. I was somebody observing from a distance. It just felt very surreal, like it wasn't happening. And it's almost like you feel like your mind is playing tricks on you. And I was exhausted the whole 6 months, even though my mom was the one that was ill. You know, it was the emotional exhaustion would be, I just get into bed, and I was so glad to get into bed every night, and just because I knew when I was asleep I wouldn't be thinking about it or about her and the situation and how that situation was. So it was a temporary relief from what was the sleep was a temporary relief. I slept a lot. Some people don't sleep at all when somebody they love is ill.
Yeah.
And then I just went into, okay, this is rest of life must continue. The lack of, I didn't have therapy until years after. I had maybe 2 counseling sessions when I was at university, but that was it. And I would have gone, actually, the grief came back again when I had my own children. So I had twins and realized that my mum obviously wasn't there. And 7 years ago, so just when my twins were a few months old, that's when I actually started therapy, because I thought, this is really hard. And this is hard without my mom. And then within those sessions, I dealt with a lot of things that happened years before. So, grief can come up and it can shock you at any moment. It can just suddenly hit you. You might be doing something, might be at a party, or you have a significant milestone in your life, like graduating university, having your own children, getting married, and that person that you want to be there is not there. And that's painful. So around those kind of occasions, it can be very painful. And I think knowing I had really good support from my family. But yeah, the whole having somebody who's not part of your family, who's objective, who can basically make you see the big picture, because some of your family members might change as well when somebody gets seriously ill. Some people behave well, some people don't behave well. One of my aunts didn't behave very well. She was the alcoholic. She caused me a lot of stress. So being able to see that objectively, it's like with coaching, a therapist is a coach. They help you see what you don't see. I think the mindset piece of it as well, if I could go back, I would have had a mindset coach, although they didn't exist at the time.
Yeah.
Then it was like, well, you go to the psychologist or the psychiatrist, and that was it. There weren't, and then the therapist, or counseling, but it still wasn't very mainstream. So yeah, those 2 things, the therapy, the mindset, because it is all about everything in life. Sales, if we're talking about sales, if we're running our own business, it's our mind that we control and have the power over. And for a while, I didn't feel like I had that control over my mind. And that is very scary.
Yeah. And I really like probably where we're about to go now in the chat here, which is around how you've, used it to your own advantage and said, when you get rejected in sales or a client churns or someone shouts at you or whatever it is, that difficulty, because you've been through that experience, you've lost a parent, which is one of the worst things you can go through. It's like, oh, that's not that big a deal. And we had guy Andy Culligan, you may know, on the show, and he said the same thing because he lost his brother. But I really like that mindset because, and as you said, it took you a long time to get there. But I have a big problem with, especially on social media, of like modern mental health. Mental health has almost become this like trendy thing, but I think in a way it's very much leaning towards almost like a victim mindset. So I think
Yeah.
mental health in itself, talking about mental health, men being more open about their emotions and dealing with things like grief and difficulties and stuff they're going through in their life that can avoid things like suicide is obviously a good thing. But I think it's not such a good thing where we talk so much about these problems. It's like, oh, the reason I'm always going to be depressed or I'm always going to be a failure always because of this is because I had this bereavement or because this thing happened to me. And we're just perpetuating that victim culture. And I think that's happening a
Yeah.
lot on social media where people are boasting, oh, look at me, this poor thing happened to me, and they get loads of likes and it's viral. But there's no solution at the end of it. And I think even a lot of therapists are going that way as well, which I don't think is good. So what I really like about your story is, okay, hey, you had this long period, but you've actually come out at the end of it and you're using it to your advantage. But I imagine that
Yeah.
was like a long process you went through. And like, how did you come to, where you are now with this
Yeah.
topic?
And I only started sharing my story 3 years ago. That was the first time that I was brave enough, to open up about it, because I felt like I've been full circle now. And yeah, there is a lot on social media about the victim mentality, which is very dangerous. And so how can you show the transformation? Like if you're going to be a
Yes.
victim, and we've all been guilty of thinking it's happening to me, not for me. But how have you turned that around? That's what I want to know. Yes, if you're suffering and you're struggling, that it's important to share that, but you can almost overshare things. People don't
Yes.
know everything on social media. There are things that are private for your private group of friends. It's like, where do you draw the line there? That's where some people, I think, they've got it, but they haven't really got it.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And there's a person, actually, a few people, he's someone who's got like a big following on LinkedIn, and a lot of people said, I get him on the show. And I said, even though he's talking about mental health, he's not talking about mental health in the way that I want, because I feel like he would come on the show and people would just become more depressed listening to it. Because it's like there's no like solution at the end of the tunnel, and it's almost like a therapy session in itself. Whereas I think I think you posting on social media as you have, it's the right time because you've gone through this process. Whereas I think if you're posting on social media when you're in that 10 years of depression, that's probably not going to do you good, because it's just going to like perpetuate whatever you're feeling at the time.
Yeah, it is. And when you're going through it, it's hard to you're going to be very raw in the process. And that's not something that I would have felt comfortable posting about. Now that I've come out the other side, it feels, that I have to tell that story. I have to help other people, because you can do what you think you can't do.
Mm,
Even, I started off in sales, but I was guilty of a fixed mindset in the beginning. Having
yeah.
a fixed mind, in the fixed mindset, nothing happens. Everything is doom and gloom. Or you feel like, a lot of the times I would say, oh, my success is down to luck. It's a fluke. It's not me. It's a fluke. Nah, but I didn't do this. I put myself down a lot, probably out of fear, because in the UK we fear, don't we? Sort of sounding as if we're bragging. We don't want to
Yeah.
own
Yes.
our success. And I think this is another thing where social media is good, because you can own that success in a non-bragging way. I always say, if I'm putting results out there, it's to inspire the people. It's not to brag. There's
Yeah.
a story and a lesson behind it, which I never thought I would achieve.
Yeah.
Even, like I said, 18 months ago, I wouldn't have thought I'd start a business at all.
Yeah.
I would have laughed at you and said, nah, LinkedIn's not going to turn into a business. But I was actually sitting on a lot of business and opportunities 18 months ago that I didn't get to work on. I just thought, because I was saying to myself, well, I'm in my corporate job, I've got that. LinkedIn's just a hobby kind of thing. I'm teaching people, I'm sharing my sales knowledge in the hope that it helps one person. But even, yeah, starting my podcast as well was the first thing that I did. I was like, no, I'm not going to make a business out of this. Didn't
Mm,
cross my mind.
yeah.
In my 40s, right? So this is crazy. I have clients now that are older than me who are now knowing that this is possible as well. Age doesn't define you. It doesn't mean you can't do something. You can absolutely do anything that you want to do.
Yeah.
Provided you, if you want to seek help, get the right help, the right mentors or the right coaches, you can do it. If you don't want to do it, to me, it tells me it's not a priority.
Yeah. Wanted to ask, you mentioned your twins.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said that we don't talk about death enough in the West. I think like in Eastern cultures, it's more of a thing where, you know, death is talked about, people prepare for death as well. Whereas I feel like in the West, it's more, oh, someone in your family's died, now like deal with it and sort out the funeral and all that stuff. Um, what they're probably too young. You said there's 7, is that right? Your
They
twins?
just turned 8 last week.
Just turned 8, right? So imagine maybe you hadn't had the conversation with them yet, but like how will you approach the, you know, topic of death and grieving with them? Because I imagine you wouldn't want them to, you know, go through some of the things that you've gone through.
Yeah, I have talked to them about death, probably in a very frank way. And there are books which help you can buy, which tell a story about death to children, like how to talk to children. I've told both of them that my mom died, that she died of a brain tumor, that she was, young, that it was very unexpected. My dad was older. And they remember her name. We've actually got a video, which I've not watched since we recorded it, of me and my mom at a New Year's Eve party. And this was just 6 weeks before she took ill. And I've got it, and it's an old VHS video, so I have to convert it. But I want to watch that with my children. That would be very emotional, because that's the only video that I have of her, and I only have photos. And I don't have very many photos, because in the 1990s, we didn't take photos. We took them with a camera. They then got processed, and you had to wait a week to get them back from, what was it? I'm thinking of the
Snappy
name.
snaps or
Yeah, snappy snaps. So, and the photos were usually bad because somebody was not smiling at the camera or looking away. Half of them would be like, I'll throw them away. So, yeah, I have talked to them about my parents. They know who they are. I say, oh, they'd be different because they've got Spanish grandparents. My husband's Spanish. So it's a very different experience that they'd be having with my parents compared to what they're getting now. So I remind them of that. I say to them, that we're all going to pass away at some stage. My son asked me the other day, do children get sick? And I said, sometimes children do get sick, and the doctors can't fix it, but it's very, very rare. And I think, it's a good question you ask, because I'm almost coming up to the age of what my mom was. And by the time she was my age now, she was already having like quite crippling headaches, but not really telling us how serious they were. And I worry. And one of the things I've done is a 75-day challenge, which has completely changed my diet beyond, I've had no cake, no sugar, no salt, the last 2 weeks, no caffeine, no alcohol at all, the whole duration, and which is fine because I was only very much an occasional drinker anyway. And yeah, it's been a very different experience thinking, I'm at this age now, and you need to start young, where whatever I put into my body, it's looking at my body's going to look after me in the future. So I need to do the right exercise, not just a load of cardio. I need to be lifting weights, building muscle, because when I'm 70 or 80 or 90, I want to be able to walk. Probably won't be able to run 5 kilometers, but because I've built that muscle tone and I keep building it, and because I'm eating the right food and being very controlled about what I put into my body, I am looking after myself and putting myself first.
Yeah.
Rather than, and this is something that has really hit me because of, the age that I'm at now. And because I was an emotional eater as well. So whenever I get stressed, and lately, when I started my own business last year, this became more acute. I would reach for bad food, nachos, too much coffee, too much tea. And I would notice the feeling that I felt like this mental fog, you know, just, I was still operating, but I didn't feel as clear-headed as I do now. And I realized, because in your 30s, you can eat pretty much anything, or at least I could, and it didn't really, yeah, you could have pizza every day or hamburger 3 or 4 times a week, and it didn't make you feel, it didn't make you feel like you were, it didn't make you feel yucky, it didn't make you feel like, oh, I've eaten bad food, I need to eat healthy food. But in the last couple of years, eating that kind of food regularly, your body just doesn't, your body can't take it. You know that what you're eating is bad, and you start to gain weight more than you did because you're older. So that's something I started this in January. I'm finishing it this week, and then I have a break, and then I'll do it again. But it's keeping that food intake. I've learned to cook. I've learned to, because I was a terrible cook before. I understand now what foods I need to eat more protein, less carbs, no white potatoes, no white bread. You know, these are all simple things that sometimes we don't think about. What we put into our body is really important. People go, oh yeah, but that person's really healthy and they got sick. Like with my mom, they say, yeah, but my mom didn't drink alcohol, she didn't smoke. She drank a lot of decaf coffee and had sweetener, which I think maybe was something, or maybe there was some disposition. I just don't know. But even so, that feeling of I'm eating what I want to eat because I want to look after myself and put myself first, and take care of my health, is a big thing. It's a big thing. And again, it ties into the salesperson. We control the process. We can control the input.
Yeah.
We can't control the output. So we know that a certain amount of activity will generate sales, and it might be different one month to the next month.
Yeah.
But we adapt. And with our body, we know that putting good stuff in food into our body is going to mean that we're less likely to get nasty illnesses. But we still can't prevent the fact that one day we'll die. But what we want is to control that process, slow that process down. And this is where, you know, I see a lot of people exercising and doing healthy exercise. They look healthy. You know, they look healthy. Like imagine you've got like a really nice sports car, Ferrari, I don't know, that's a high-end luxury car. But inside the engine's bad, it's dodgy, it doesn't really go. You know, people look healthy, but what's really going on inside? Are they eating the right food? We can't see.
Yeah.
And we will be able to see, you know, genetics will, testing will get better and better. So we see what we're predispositioned to get as diseases, but we need to promote our brain health, our body health, and we really need to think about what we're eating as well. So that's another thing I wanted to really mention, because what we eat also controls our mental health. If we're eating bad food, that's not helping our mental health. And as you get older, your body is like, nah, can't eat that anymore. Doesn't feel good. So rather than wait until we get into our 40s, 50s, or 60s, let's start doing this when we're younger.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's kind of with what you said, it's like the acceptance of death, because it's almost like in the West we haven't accepted we're going to die. And even you see these guys like Brian Johnson, which is like, you know, I'm going to live forever, and I've got like a diet every day, and he eats at a specific time, and he doesn't, you know, he's a character in itself. But it's like the lack of accepting that we're going to die. But at the same time, it's not saying, oh, we're all going to die anyway, so let's be nihilistic and let's go out on the town tonight and like smash 10 pints. You know, it's not that. Except it's more like, yes, we're going to die, but then the other side of it is I still want to live as long as possible, because I want to be a great mother to my children and provide an example for them and watch the foods I eat and exercise and all this stuff. And you mentioned you're not going to be able to do 5K, but maybe you will be able to do 5K when you're 85. Like my dad is 82 and he's still doing 10Ks,
he's
right?
Doing
so,
10K?
yeah.
That makes me feel better. Okay, so that makes me feel a lot better. But yeah, that's the thing, right? He's looked after his health. He's exercised, he's showed up, right? Your dad, so that he can do that. But there's so many, if you look at so many people who are old, they've not done that. They've not looked after their health. They've not lifted weights. They've not gone to the gym. And it shows when they haven't done that and they can't move. Your mobility will decrease. But what I've been doing in the last 75 days, it's not just eating, it's also been exercise. So I ran the other week a 10K 5 minutes faster than what I normally do without making the extra effort, because I felt stronger. I was like, oh, my muscles are actually running for me rather than me having to push myself more. I was just running at quite a leisurely pace, and I was thinking, wow, this is 5 minutes faster, and I didn't really put in much effort. So the muscle, the weights, the lifting, that's where you get that extra strength. You feel good when you show up in your work. You feel more in control of yourself, and bad stuff's going to happen. Might get a really stressed out client. You might get somebody that is awful to you, or you're more equipped to deal with it. You're more equipped to deal with it. And that nihilistic view of, oh well, we're going to die anyway, so why not? It's just not the way. It's just not the way to go. I mean, I'm not saying here don't go out and have fun. You can do that, but know the power of what you're putting into your body, what you're doing, saying yes to, what you're saying no to. Make sure that you have that willpower.
Yeah. I just wanted to talk about one last topic with you, which is, again, a topic I get a little bit annoyed by people on social media when they talk about, which is law of attraction and visualization. And I think it can be very positive, but I think there's a lot of, snakes online who are saying, oh, if you visualize $1 million in your head, it's going to come your way and all this stuff, right? But I do think definitely visualization can be done in a positive way with things like sales. So yeah, I wonder if you could run us through your journey with law of attraction, visualization.
Yeah. And I laughed and poo-pooed these things up until very recently, because I thought, that's all for hippies and weird people. Visualization is also writing down what you're going to achieve, what you want to achieve. So it ties into that reframing with your mindset. But if you think about this, let's say you buy a white Mini, that's your car, right? Suddenly you see them everywhere. You see that car everywhere. You're picking it out, you're picking it out, you're picking it out. Your brain is picking it out. And this applies to other stuff as well. If you feel that you're going to fail at something and do badly, you start getting those feelings, everything starts appearing. Like, so the more you focus on something, the more your brain starts picking out and seeing patterns, right?
Yeah.
If I say to you, you've got circles and triangles, and I'm like, look at the circles, you might focus on the triangles, but you're going to focus on something, and that's all you will see. And you won't see what else is happening as well. So, every week I write down, these are the meetings that I'm going to book. These are the people I'm going to help. Writing it down and seeing that successful outcome has helped me massively, massively. And, what I want to achieve, when I visualized it, it happens.
Yeah, love it. Well, Charlotte, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there anything you wanted to promote? Obviously, we'll put your website, your social media, but anything else you want to put in the show notes or talk about now?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Charlotte Lloyd Sales. I run a social selling and sales outreach community for the doors will open next week. That might be when the podcast is live. And it's a 15-week program. So if you're a sales professional looking to maybe build your personal brand or a side hustle, then this is for you. Founders, solos, coaches, and consultants who want to level up with their LinkedIn and with their sales.
Awesome. We'll love it. And yeah, thanks so much for being so open about your journey and your experience. It's been fascinating. And yeah, I always enjoy these conversations with people like you who I know, but talking on a different level. Oh.
And thank you as well, because you're one of the originals on LinkedIn. You were on LinkedIn before most people are now, so you've seen a lot. You see the fads, you see the things changing. You're one of those. You're of the good original people that started before anyone else, right?
Well, yeah, we try, and we'll do another episode where we moan about LinkedIn, but also talk about the benefits of it as well.
Oh, okay, Brill. We finished then.
Okay, so I'm going to give you two takeaways from Charlotte's story today. The first one is we need to talk about death more. This obviously sounds very morbid, especially to us in our Western culture, but we don't prepare ourselves for death. And that's why when something happens, like the loss of a loved one or a mum in the case of Charlotte, we're not prepared for these situations. So, like she said, she's now talked about death already with her two children, even though they're only 8 years old. And that's now allowed a conversation where they're even asking her questions like, oh, what happens to me? Can I die as well? And then Charlotte says, yes, probably not at your age because it's very rare, but we're all going to die eventually. So it's good that we have this understanding from a young age. We should all be talking about death more with each other. We also did another episode on this subject around like talking about death with your kids. So we'll put that show in the show notes with a guy called Felix Koch. And then the second takeaway is, like Charlotte said, that the death of her mother actually was something that happened for her, not to her, right? And it's this switching of the mindset of I'm a victim to this situation, that I need to have gratitude for this situation, however tough it is, because this is something that's part of my destiny that's going to make me a tougher person. Obviously, it's very difficult to realize that at the time, but long term, you can look back at these moments and think that if you like this episode, if you know anyone who's struggling at the moment, maybe with the death of a loved one, like Charlotte, send them the episode. Please leave us a review because that really helps. And we'll see you next week.